etc. And then what we saw is super interesting. So from April, it started cooling off. And we saw a massive reduction coming in over the next couple of months. And now again in June, it is again going back. It's back on the upward curve. One interesting other data which we saw when we were mining through millions of transactions which we process on a monthly basis is that April and May saw a massive reduction in investment-related transactions. So people tend to hold their money back. They say, hey, this is not the time for me to send money back for investments. They only send money back as needed to basically put the food on the table or to pay their mortgages or pay their bills, etc. So that's an interesting trend which we saw. A second interesting aspect which we saw when we mined the data is the increase in digital transactions of less than $500. So the way we look at it is skilled migrants tend to send a larger amount, unskilled tend to send a smaller amount. And again, we saw an increase, and these increases were largely from people who are sending larger tickets. But what happened is that for their domestic helper, they actually started saying that, hey, there is no way you can go out. Why don't I send money on your behalf to the bank account? Right, and that is something which we saw significantly increase. So that's the first trend where we've seen, and going back to some points that Larry also made, which I totally agree, is that I don't think we've seen the real impact of COVID yet, because in all countries, basically governments have propped up SME industries by actually dishing out loans, by giving a lot of money, by saying that please don't fire your employees, please at least pay 60-70% of salaries, etc., etc., etc. That is going to change, right? That is definitely going to change. So I think the impact we'll see is closer to Q3, is at least the way we are looking at it. A lot of people, today the concern is whether that job which you're using to basically send the money back home, is that going to be there? So it's an existential kind of a question. So that's trend one. Trend two, which we're seeing is a change in behavior. And this is super interesting, right? And I can give you a personal example at home. I run a digital remittance company, but when I told my domestic helper who lives with us saying that, hey, can I send money on your behalf back to your son? She said, no, give me cash, right? There is somebody I trust, I go give it to him, and basically he makes money magically appear. So like a brick and mortar setup, right? And she came up to me saying that, hey, you know what, don't give me cash because I can't go out anyway. So can you send that money back? So I think that, and a lot of digital operators like us have spent millions of dollars to change behavior, but we haven't been able to, right? So there's no digital operator who can say, hey, really, we've changed behavior. Because again, going back to some of the comments which was made, that there is no bank account, there is no applicability around how do you basically even collect them. But this is an interesting change which you're seeing with, my helper actually spent time with me. How do I set up a wallet? Can you pay me into a wallet? I want to understand this. And that change is, I think, super amazing, right? Brands have tried to spend millions of dollars and not achieve anything. I'm seeing that change. Now, the question goes back to, is that change long-term, right? And for a brief moment, I really was super happy that, the brick and mortar industry will be really troubled with this and digital operators will thrive. Then in Singapore, they opened up Lucky Plaza, which is where a lot of Filipinos use that to kind of send money back home. And the traffic was chock-a-block. Means there were hundreds of people outside, people queuing up. So then it's again goes back. It was a fairly disappointing day because, I was like, sort of, guys, use the app. And there is so many interesting comments people threw. Interesting comments such as, hey, my employer doesn't allow me to access Wi-Fi at home. So how am I going to access your mobile app to send money? And these are things which you would never think about. Like, who blocks their person who lives with them and takes care of their family or Wi-Fi, right? I think so. There is a lot of change, but at least that behavior has changed. So I've seen the fact that a lot of people, construction workers, etc., they're saying, hey, what is the app about? What's the wallet? How do I save? Is the money safe? So I think that's been interesting questions which we've seen. I think the third trend which we've seen, which I think is probably the most important trend, is a lot of brick and mortar remittance shops have actually approached us saying that right now we are in big trouble. Can we use your digital platform to see how we can kind of move our customers from offline to online? And I think that's an interesting element which we'll see more and more, happening. Because today what's happened is, I think, everyone can be super transparent. The fact that nobody thought that there will be a time where people cannot get out of the house and go and stand in the line and queue and send back money. So suddenly these guys have realized the fact that, hey, this is and COVID is going to be living with us. COVID is not going to, like, you click our fingers and it's disappeared. It's, I keep hearing from people post-COVID, but when is post-COVID? There is no post-COVID at this point. We're still trying to figure out what reality or how our lives are going to be as normal. It's wearing a face mask, which is so common in most part of Asia, like the next thing. Is it super compulsory? So things like that. So I'm seeing the fact that a lot of brick and mortar companies are approaching us saying that, hey, can you do a wallet for us? Can we take your wallet? Can we use your website? And things like that, which I think is a very positive change, because they've realized the fact that how they can actually get digital. And we've heard this statement so many times. The amount of digital work which has happened in the last 6 months is more than the amount of work which has happened in 5, 6 years. So I think these are the top 3 trends we see. I think interestingly, people sitting at home, etc. Ending of my remark in a funny note is that I'm going to have tough times explaining to my child that it is not okay to wear a face mask and get into a branch of a bank. She may actually get shot, but these are things we never know how our world is going to change. And that's, I think, the super scary thing which we live with, because nobody knows what's going to happen 6 months later.
Thank you, Pajit. I hope your mate didn't come back and ask you to reduce your fees after that, but you don't have to answer that. But let's talk digital, because clearly, you can't have a conversation right now, particularly with anybody in remittances, without talking about digital or picking up a statement that's been released. And is it really the magic pill that solves all the issues, right? So, I mean, my contention is, and you touched on some of this, migrants weren't waiting for COVID to happen, right, to migrate to digital. So there's big infrastructural issues, there's trust issues, there's literacy issues, all kinds of those things that need to sort of be fixed. And somebody who's lived what is it now, almost 10 years, I guess, that you've had this journey and so on, and done great. I mean, a lot of people are now rushing to sort of digitize, and digitize isn't just putting an app out or putting a website out, right? So what would you, I guess, learning from your experience, what would you say to them? And also, I was very interested, and we'll explore this with Larry also and Alonzo, that when locations do open, do we just see this trend reverse? Or is there that stickiness because it's so convenient that people will stick to it? I mean, and just one other thought on that also is, do the smaller guys get left out as digital happens, right? Because just given the amount of money you need in terms of acquisition and so on, what is the impact on the smaller players in this race to digitization, if I can put it? Pajit, if you want to start.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to come to you, Larry, but let Pajit kick it off, and then I'm going to build on this.
Somewhere, I would love to give you a digital answer saying that, oh man, digital is amazing. It's the matrix blue pill you have and your world changes, but it's not. I wish it was, but it's not, right? I think as you rightly picked up, there are a lot of aspects to it. It's an absolute journey. Today, it's a forced journey. Today, what's happening is you are stuck in your house, or a construction worker is basically sitting in his dormitory. There is nothing much to do. So then basically, then they are saying, okay, let me learn about the wallet. I think there is a big journey which is going to happen. So if this continues for over 12 more months, the same way as economies will collapse. But in reality, then there can be a change. But digital only is not like, for example, there were quite a few brick and mortar shops came in and they said, hey, we want to use your mobile app, we want to use your web platform. And I said, okay, I'm happy to do all of that. But your customers are guys with cash. What do they do with cash? Like, I don't have a bank account where you can go and deposit money. I only accept digital transfers, right? So then say, oh, so let me figure out that. So I think a lot of elements needs to be figured out. Things like smartphones, etc., is getting much better, right? Penetration of smartphones, especially in this part of the world, access to wallets in this part of the world, all of that is scaling pretty rapidly. But somewhere I believe that it's a large enough problem. So I think it's the traditional as well as the digital operators need to get together to solve it. I don't think one side of the story can solve it. I think it's a large enough problem where if we get together, there can be a solution, because it is an important thing to solve as well, because there is traditional operators hate the fact that we charge so low because we're digital and we try to remove the middlemen. We don't like the fact that there are middlemen, etc. when you say, but I think there is a combination of both, where you're able to make a decent enough fee to cover all your expenses and give that digital experience to the person with the trust which large traditional brands have.
Right. Sorry, Larry, you were going to.
Well, I was going to go to the end of your question, which was, what do the smaller players do who don't have digital? And really, kind of describe what actually digital means. Right now for us, if somebody uses their app on their phone to send, but if somebody picks it up in cash, that's a digital transaction. So it doesn't alleviate the need for an agent network. It doesn't mean that you've all of a sudden that everybody that has a cash network is obsolete. I think that there's still a tremendous use of cash in the world, and I think that there's still a huge need for agents around the world. And so it's not like a pivot, where you're turning your back on one thing and moving to another. But I think that, as I said earlier, this is a point of inflection where if you don't have digital capabilities, you're definitely going to have a tough time growing in this environment, because you have a generational change, you have a technological change, and the acceptance of digital just reached a new level with the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that, you may have been avoiding it and now you tried it. And what happens is that you find out that it's easier and it's cheaper. And, what you're finding is that once you go to it, maybe you don't have a reason to go back, but you might need to change providers in order to do that. I think that this is where, we put an announcement out yesterday, that we've seen over 100% growth globally on our digital properties. That's an average. We've seen growth numbers well in excess of that. And I don't think, it reminds me a little bit of, the days when the phone company, you had a landline and a cell phone, and for a while you did both, and after a while you picked, your cell phone or your mobile. And I think we're at that stage. I don't, and I think that we're seeing in our own business that most of our customers are not coming from a MoneyGram walk-in location. They're actually coming from somewhere else. We're still, we've always said about 80% of our customers in digital are new to the brand. It's a little lower than that now, but it's still really high. So I do think that there's a migration to digital players, and I think it was born of necessity. I think the real interesting thing is that once you've registered and your second transaction is so much easier than your first, and it's if it's cheaper and it's faster, why go back? And I think that's really, I do think that there'll be some people, just like in India when demonetization, some people went back to cash as quickly as they could, but we saw a permanent change that really moved to mobile wallets in India after that change, and I think this is kind of what we're seeing. But it plays out over a longer period of time. I don't think that this is overnight. I haven't really seen any brands disappear from the market at this point. But I do think that without digital, your growth prospects and your relevance, I think, to the future are going to be reduced.
Yeah, congratulations on the 100% announcement. I think you beat Western Union by 1%, right? They said it was 99%. So we won't talk about absolute numbers, but Larry, if I remember right, I think the Q1 earnings, you said it was still circa 20% or so, right? Less than 20% of your total volume. So, I mean, that still shows you how important the sort of omni-channel approach is and developing the agent network, right? So that's not going to go away.
We've increased our presence in the market. We've increased our investment in the agent network. We've been far more active and aggressive in terms of signing agents and building that network. Because what we're finding is that it's really not mutually exclusive. It really adds utility to your network, whether it's a digital or a cash send. So a lot of this is generational too. If I'm sending money to my parents, I may be digital, but my parents still may live in cash. And we're seeing that a lot, where in entirely digital startups, or they're not startups anymore. They're big companies, but they're starting to look for cash, opportunities to pay out in cash. We've seen that with Zoom. We've seen it with, where it isn't just mutually exclusive. One of the analogies that we've started to look at, especially the last quarter when we were looking at quarterly earnings, is a lot of companies like restaurants were saying, well, we're closed because we have to close, but our digital business has gone crazy. People are ordering food online and picking it up at the restaurant. I don't think that's necessarily a corollary, because the price is the same. You're still going to pick up the food. It's not really a transformational technology. To do digital in a financial services environment, it isn't just putting up a website or an app. There's all the infrastructure has to go with that. And the customer actually has to have a different type of capability, and typically the price is lower. So you also have to be able to make money at a lower price point with improved technology, and that's not easy. It's not for everybody. So I do think that this is it isn't just like retail where everybody goes to Amazon, and then I don't think it's that simple. And I do think the cash network is going to be essential for this business for quite a while.
Right. Alonzo, if I can just ask, you'll have to unmute yourself, but if I can just ask you to sort of pitch in as somebody who's following a similar omni-channel approach. I mean, you had the Zoom partnership, now you're very focused on rolling out your own app across Europe, as we've seen. What has your experience been at RIA?
I believe that, digital is also an added convenience to the customer. Digital is not here to replace, but in any means, brick and mortar. That will remain. In terms of that omni-channel experience, customers want, they want many things. They want convenience, they want speed, they want, all those good that an omni-channel experience would bring you. Today, what we're seeing is definitely an uptick in digital because of the situation, obviously, where customers have the dramatic need to transact away from things. So the lockdowns obviously have created the fact that many brick and mortar locations have been closed and whatnot. So they've accelerated a bit that uptick in digital. We've all experienced that. We've seen it. I think it's definitely an important part of our strategy to continue to develop that. But we're not in any way, moving away from brick and mortar. It's a complement, as we've seen in many other industries. Remember the boom of online shopping and whatnot. There's still many people who don't like to buy shoes online because it's a hassle to return them, type thing, and so we believe that digital will continue to be definitely a big part of our strategy. Customers, again, there's a lot to it. It's not just turning on a switch and moving forward. Customer need to embrace the technology and use it, which again we're seeing it today because of that immediate need that they see and they need. And so being there is super important. But again, I think brick and mortar will continue to be out there for many years. Again, going back to the previous conversation, and in terms of the uncertainty that we're facing, we will see customer behavior is what's going to dictate what's next, I guess, which we'll see unfold in the next several months. Right.
Deepali, if I can come to you last, as I guess somebody that sort of represents the migrants in this discussion, your thoughts on, perhaps what we as an industry can do more in terms of really promoting digital solutions. Is it more about digital literacy and encourage migrants to adopt this, about financial inclusion, or just generally what's your feeling in terms of what you're seeing on the ground from a migrant's perspective? And you're on mute right now, so you'll have to unmute yourself. Great.
Michelle. No, I think, Mohit, I think, this whole discussion basically on digitization, I think is a good one. I mean, our objective is basically financial inclusion. So whether it happens digitally or whether it happens through MTOs, brick and mortar, it's good to hear that both of them will continue, because as we have learned that migrants use both, and as has been reflected today. In terms of what can be done, I think definitely financial and digital literacy would be crucial. And that's something that maybe IAMTN can work with governments and international organizations on. That's one aspect. And I think secondly is, depending on which way, or maybe, both channels, look at behavioral changes that will be required, or, aspects that will be required to get people to understand what digitalization means and how that can be enhanced. And thirdly is potentially partnerships with diaspora associations and migrant associations, NGOs as well. Again, maybe through a neutral body like IAMTN, to work with them to understand what their needs are and what they would be more accustomed to working with, basically.
Right, great. So let's do a poll now. If Veronica, you can get that up, where we did this even last time. We want to see what percentage of transactions do the participants think will be digital in the next 3 to 6 months. So it should be coming on your screen. If you could pick one option from those two, and then will be interesting. I'll share with you what we had on the webinar last time to see how that's moved since it's been a month, I guess, roughly. And Veronica, whenever you have enough, I think we have 115 participants now, 120. So whenever you have enough responses, you can close it and project the results.
I think we have over 60%, so I will close it now.
Okay. Right, so, so 41% in the 20 to 40% bracket, 20% under 20, and then, more than 60%. So that's interesting. So just comparing this to last month, under 20% was, can you put it back up? Was 21%, so very similar. 37% to 41%, so very similar. 6% has gone to 19, so clearly there's a big move there. And more than 60% has actually gone down. So this may be because Lucky Plaza opened up, Pajit, as you were saying. And but that's interesting. So sorry, I'm not as technically able to put both comparisons for you, but we will publish them side by side, so you'll be able to see it. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Let's move on to the next topic, and I can see a lot of questions coming in, so I'm trying to incorporate those as we move on. World Bank put out an estimate that 20% decline on global remittances. Some said, wow, that's horrific. Others said, wow, actually, we think it's going to be a lot more. I think we saw that, certainly talking to people, March, April was pretty bad, but then it seems to be sort of bouncing back, as I think a lot of the people on the panel also said that you're experiencing that. So I guess I'd just love to hear, and maybe we can start with you, Alonzo, just sort of, what are you seeing? I mean, you can share numbers if you feel happy to, or just give us a sort of a trend. And are there particular corridors that are more badly hit than others? And just what are you seeing on the ground? And do you think 20% is realistic, or is it going to be a lot worse, or is it actually better?
Well, at the beginning, when we heard the number, we thought it may be worse given the situation as it was unfolding. May brought some good numbers. We continue to see that lift in the early stages in June. So again, the optimist view is that it is recovering, going back to relaxation of restrictions and whatnot, people coming back to work and economic activity resuming. The problem at hand is, again, the uncertainty of what's going to happen next in terms of those businesses that have been closed for a long time. Can they recover? Are people going to come and use them? You see it in the restaurant industry, where despite the fact that lockdowns have been lifted, you still cannot come and dine in everywhere you want, out of a restriction or out of fear, whichever the case may be. Many of those places will still suffer. So the question at hand there is whether that economic recovery is going to be sustainable for people to continue working. What we've seen again so far is a nice lift all over. So we're optimistic that this will continue the trend. So then maybe the 20% will get diluted in the next several weeks. We're still yet to see.
Okay. Larry, anything you'd like to comment on this?
Well, I think part of that too, I think the 20% was like the face amount to be transferred. You know, it's hard to parse how that would translate into the results for an MSB. If I used to send $150 and now I send $120, the price is pretty much the same. I still did a send, you know, so I don't think the 20% necessarily translates percentage-wise to what the impact on remitters is. I do think that they're onto something in terms of the macroeconomic impact. I don't see how it's possible for the global economy to go back to where it was, you know, in January. But I don't think that I don't think that 20% means that everybody's revenue is going to go down 20%. I think that was the initial reaction that people had, and I don't think anybody's seeing that at this point. But I'll agree that this hasn't played out yet. But I think the 20% is a high number, and it relates to face. But I don't think the impact is going to be negligible. I just think that's a pretty high number.
Right. And Pajit, I guess, as you mentioned, I mean, digital, you're actually seeing an increase, but the challenge for you is, I guess, with everybody, as longer it goes on, if they just don't have money to send, it doesn't really matter whether you're digital or not digital, there is no money going home, right? I think that's the bigger issue.
I think that's correct. But, you know, I can also say that the number which is put out on the total remittances, which is about 680 billion, I'm not really sure how accurate that number is. I think it's much more to be just like, for example, we are on track this year to process about $4 billion into India just as a single market. That says that if you look at based on the last stats, that says that we are 5% into the India market. Really, I want to believe that's true, but that's not. I think the market is much bigger. And there are a lot of elements which are not being covered in the data which basically gets published. I think we don't have enough conclusive evidence to say today that 20% is the right number, or will it be higher, etc. You know, some countries are recovering, but they're cautiously recovering, right? Except in some markets, but everyone is cautiously recovering, except New Zealand, right? But New Zealand is not a game changer. It's like the Middle East or the US and things like that, right? It's extremely cautious, things like that. But today, the fear for me is everyone is propped up by government funding. Let it be SMEs, let it be, and everyone's been told that. I was speaking to a friend in India, and he runs a fairly large manufacturing setup, and he has about 600 employees, like mostly daily wage earners. And he got a call from the ministry, from the sets of people from the government saying that please ensure that you pay your wages to your daily wage guys, right? Don't hurt them more. We are figuring out what we can do, how we can support you, but please don't. Okay. Now, he was able to do it for 1 month, 2 months. Third month, he is going to say that, hey, if I continue to pay these guys when I'm making zero money, how am I even going to survive, right? Some of the economies are going to be like for example, India, right? They are actually opening up right now when the cases haven't really gone down. That's going to create an interesting thing. Like if you look at us, we've taken a call to keep our offices shut throughout the year. Very simple thing that in India we've got 250 colleagues, and if one colleague gets sick, he's going to spread it to and let's look at selfishly, right? If like 50 of my engineers get it, that means I don't have the tech bandwidth to do 50 engineers work, right? So it makes sense. Working from home is working. So fundamentally, I think I don't have a real answer for you. I don't know whether it's going to be 20% higher or lower, because I think Q3 is going to be super critical, because that whole prop up from government was for this quarter, which comes to an end. Q3, I don't think people are going to, all these people who are basically making, in my view, like charity payments to ensure the fact that, they can take care of their colleagues and members and stuff like that. That will stop. People will say that, hey, do I pay myself or just keep this going? And that's where my nervousness is, that today everyone's on a high, like March, right? Look at the news reports. Every digital remittance company said that we've hit our all-time high. April, not even a single report. What does that mean? That April hasn't crossed March. But again, June end, you are going to see the same reports that, oh, we beat March, right? But people are not going to talk about April and maybe quiet. So I think fundamentally, I don't believe that anyone has a pulse. So whoever's saying that, hey, I'm going to bet is basically looking at a crystal maze and saying that, okay, I'm taking a gut call.
Yeah. I wonder whether there's another phenomenon happening, which is, I mean, we talk about the migration to digital, but, you know, not everybody can migrate because they just, you know, you still need to have access to some form of either, you know, banking sort of channel to be able to do the transaction. So is there a migration happening actually from formal to informal at the same time that, you know, we just don't know? Because if there's lockdown and there's no accessibility, then, you know, that may also be happening.
I think, Mohit, it's a very interesting point. I also think that this is a great opportunity regulatorily wise. I think, you know, one actually embassy in Singapore ensured the fact that every domestic helper construction worker coming from that country has to open a bank account. They partnered with a bank, made it minimum balance, and things like that. Right? I think this is a great opportunity for regulators to enforce these changes. It's like you know, it's like UAE, right? Everyone gets the money in the bank account, but they're still removed from ATM and goes and stand in the line. But in some markets in Asia, there's a great opportunity for us because mobile wallet, QR code is like ingrained in us already, right? But I think it has to be a regulatory push. It can't be that, you know, I think it's regulatory by saying that nobody should be given cash. It's kind of illegal and things like that. And that will start driving this change. And this is the greatest opportunity to do this. But it has to be pushed from top down.
Yeah, no, and that's great. I mean, hold that thought because we're going to explore what can we do with the policymakers and regulators as our next topic. But Deepali, I want to just come back to you. I mean, I think we're, as an industry, focusing on, you know, sort of short-term impacts. But I just sort of wonder with, is there a long-term impact, you know, fundamental change of migration here that happens? Because infrastructure projects are being canceled, for example, in the Middle East. You know, migrants are stranded, they're going to be repatriated home, and, you know, do they come back? I mean, what's your feeling in terms of, is this a short-term impact, or do we see a fundamental shift here in migration and as a result to the economy and the industry specifically as well? And you're on mute. So I think if I had $1 for every time I told people to unmute, I would be a very rich man.
I was in the process of unmuting.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think in terms of long-term impacts, as Larry said, this has not played itself out. So, I mean, and how it plays itself out, the short term may very well move into the long term, or it may just be the very short term, you know, the discussion on the V recovery, the W recovery, the U recovery. These are the discussions which even the IMF is putting all its disclaimers on. In terms of what could happen, I think, as I mentioned earlier, one is, you know, how the recovery from the crisis, again, linked to health and economic recovery, but also how things are going to pan out in terms of technological developments going into the future, in terms of labor changes, in terms of how we work. These are things which are going to impact what kind of migration we see in the future, and if we see migration as well. Because if, you know, I mean, if there's a move towards working virtually, for instance, I mean, and I'm just asking a question here, I'm speaking in my own capacity on this. I mean, if there's a move towards working virtually, then do people really need to move? Because people move for economic gain. But if you're making your economic gain sitting where you are, it raises a different set of questions. So this is one possibility. The second thing is with return migrants, you know, 40% of remittances go back to the rural areas. So a lot of migrants actually come from the rural areas. So in terms of return migrants, it would be interesting to see how rural economies and second-tier cities develop as a result of that. And therefore, what potential business opportunities that can arise in these rural economies and second-tier cities as well. So this is the second thing. And I think the point that Pajit made on informal remittances is extremely important. I mean, informal remittances are 75% on an average formal remittances. And this is something we're looking at because it's important to regularize it in some manner or form, because there are larger development benefits to the country, to the migrant, and to their families. So this is something that we're looking at, and I think it's an important point to consider further.
Right. Thank you. So let's take another poll. Veronica, if you can put that up. I want to sort of see what's the decline in remittances that are experienced by the providers, the participants. So you have 4 categories: under 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, and I guess maybe the last one specifically for digital. No, in fact, remittances have increased. And we'll compare the results that we had at the last webinar to see how things have perhaps moved on a month since the last one. So again, Veronica, I leave it to you. When you have enough participants, you can close it and put the results up. And I thank, we still have 105 people on the call, so I thank you for staying on. And let's see what the results show. Okay, so under 20%, 45%, 20 to 40, 32, and growth is 18. So actually, that's interesting. So last time we had under 20% was 27%, and 37% had said 20 to 40%. So that's still pretty much the same. So I think by and large, people are sort of saying that the 20% estimate that the World Bank put out may actually be on the optimistic side to some extent, because that's a higher number, but we hope for the best. Right, let's move on to our last topic that I'd like to explore. And Pajit, you already sort of touched on that. There's a lot of activity happening by the public sector, which is great. We have a call to action initiated by the Swiss government and the UK government. We have the remittance task force that was sort of set up by IFAD. We have the Family Day of Remittances coming up. We have a UNCDF RFA that was put out, and IAMTN is working on all of these. So on a separate note, please give us your feedback. But it's great to see that these policymakers, regulators are really getting involved. I guess what I'd like to sort of pose to each one of you is, what do you think the public sector regulators could do at this stage to really help the industry in terms of making sure that the money is channeled? And we had things like nominating obviously all services, all locations as essential services, EKYC, all those things. But Larry, maybe you want to kick us off, and from your perspective, what would be helpful?
So, you mentioned UAE. I think one of the most important things that's happened is when countries actually require that migrant employees or non-citizens be paid through a bank account. That's the reverse, actually, of what it used to be, or still is in a lot of countries, where banking is really, an elite type of function and has been closed to most demographic groups, and especially if you're not a citizen. So when you deny, basic financial services to any segment of your economy, it's going to manifest itself in different ways. And what you've seen is that when actually the government reverses course and actually makes banking available, it opens up a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think it also greatly accelerates the digital type of properties. And I've spoken with the UK. They really seem to want to educate and basically show people the possibility. But you can't do that if they're denied banking services. We saw this with de-risking of MSBs by banks. We've seen banks decline to handle people based on their income, based on their native origin. So that's where I think the revolution starts to happen, is when a government says that, number one, we actually need immigration, we need this labor force. We also think for the safety of not only the government's financial system, but for individuals as well, that you have to pay them through a bank account. We've seen a lot of legislation that protects the pay of migrant workers, it's just a natural step to also mandate that they're paid through a bank account. Once that happens, that's the game changer, because I do think that the informal networks and a lot of what happens in remittances around the world really, again, is necessity. It's not choice. And this market changes dramatically when governments step in and mandate that banks bank the populace. I think that would be my biggest point.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I remember when WPS, which is the wage protection scheme, came out in UAE, which we thought was a great initiative and automatically transitioned to digital. And then we ended up putting ATM machines in the labor camps so people could go withdraw cash and then walk to the agent.
Right.
So, but it's a journey, right? And I think to that point, Pajit, I mean, today, one of the challenges, for sort of digitization in some of the Middle Eastern countries is that eKYC is not recognized, for example, right? So, I mean, if you're going to get somebody to come in and do that, so what's your perspective on some of the things that, policymakers could help us with?
I think, so luckily I live in Singapore, where MAS is probably one of the most forward-looking regulators, right? So I think eKYC is super critical, and MAS is a very receptive regulator as well. So when COVID actually broke out, we actually went back saying that, hey, we are a global platform, we have infrastructure. What can we do? Is there a way for us to support the ecosystem? Things like that. So, I think a lot of opportunities, right? I think, especially if you look at digital operators like us, we want simplification of KYC. Like eKYC is definitely there, but even today's eKYC actually requires us to get a photo ID and an address proof to basically onboard a customer, right? I think if we can, especially for the migrant segment, if we can focus only on one, which is a photo ID of the customer, then it kind of enables us to do rapid onboarding. In Southeast Asia, we see the fact that Malaysia, basically, you already have that law in place. In Hong Kong, that law was put in place last year. So there are a lot of opportunities on that end. Second, I think, is cost of payments, right? Domestic payments being instant is a very, very important channel, because today, what we are competing against, the digital experience, is super tough, right? So recently, I posted on LinkedIn, one of our bank customers who leverages our platform did a transaction from Thailand to India in 18 seconds. Trust me, if you'll ask a migrant, he believes that the money reaches faster than 18 seconds, right? Because his belief is he gives he gives the cash to the agent, gets the number, WhatsApps the number to his family who's standing outside, collects the cash. That seamless experience, right? We are able to create in markets where there are real-time payments. So, for example, in India, if you're sending money to India, if you're sending like less than $3,000, I can get the money to your bank account in less than 20 seconds, 30 seconds. But suddenly you move it to a market like Thailand, Australia, where there is no real-time payments. Suddenly it is, in some markets, it is faster for me, especially in Southeast Asia, to take a flight, go there on a 2.5-hour flight, give the cash, come back on a 2.5-hour flight. Our money is not yet reached. So I think this, and the third thing is what I initially brought up, right? This is a great time for regulators to push the WPS equivalent in other markets. I think why it will be successful in Asia is people are used to wallets. People were not used to wallets in Dubai when actually this came in place. People are super experienced with wallets. Some of the work with people like Grab, Gojek, etc. have done trying to really get that strata into financial services is massive. So I see a strong possibility of that happening. But going back, simplification of KYC, real-time payments network, as well as the WPS equivalent in Singapore.
Great. Alonzo, if I can ask for your views, please.
I'm not immune, Mohit, so you don't need to remind me.
My $1 is gone.
Your $1 is gone here. Over the last several weeks, we've seen, aside from the initial stage where non-bank financial sector was, up in the air whether it was essential business or not in many areas. We still had to reinforce the fact we had to assist many of our agents to ensure that they had the information for the local authorities to allow them to continue working. So that misinformation, I guess, is part of I think is very much needed in making sure that everybody understands the importance of family remittances and understand who our customer is. These are hardworking people that, regardless of their migration status and whatnot, what they're doing is working very hard to provide for the families. So I think that that's where regulators could, you know, take a harder approach in terms of coordinating, you know, to develop sound policies, procedures, to efficiently supervise activity across the world in partnership with money transmitters and banks. EKYC, for instance, is one of those aspects where sometimes it gets very complex, and the inability to service this consumer causes, in fact, that, you know, business goes underground and it's harder to regulate. So I think we're at a crossroads in that sense where, you know, I have to mention that we've seen instances where regulators in the US have been very flexible in terms of accommodating things due to this crisis, you know, postponing examinations, things of that nature. So they understand the challenges that we're facing. So we're very grateful for that as well. Offsite examinations, for example, were kind of put aside for a minute until, you know, we see things getting better. So I think that, again, in the optimistic side, we should have an open door here to engage in more collaboration to resolve many of the problems that we faced in the past.
Right, great. Deepali, I don't know if you want to add any comments. I know you and I are participating in the call to action by the Swiss and the UK government. You're participating in a lot more initiatives. Anything from the policymakers' side that you'd like to comment on?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think everything has been said between the call to action and the IFAD recommendations. And yeah, I mean, on the regulatory front, not really. But I think on financial inclusion, I think here there's a lot that can be done. And if governments can kind of incentivize this with MTOs and banks as well. For instance, the example you gave of construction workers in the GCC countries, if we can have small products, you know, insurance, you know, basic insurance, loans, small loans, those kind of things. And the other thing is public-private partnerships. We had a very good partnership with RIA in Burundi and the Burundi Post, actually, which worked very well to enhance rural access in Burundi, which had no rural access. And it was a very good partnership with UPU and the government of Burundi and RIA, which worked very well. So I think this whole private-public partnership aspect can work very well in depending on the country context. So. Yeah.
And I think some of just to mention 2 or 3 other things that, you know, as part of these discussions that we've been putting forward as IAMTN is sort of perhaps, you know, tax initiatives. So, you know, tax cuts for the remittance players so they can be passed as perhaps benefits to the consumers, whether it's in fees, credit line guarantees to help with liquidity issues, obviously de-risking, perhaps more of the PRI kind of initiative, which directly helps the consumers in terms of zero fees, and then a rebate passed back to the providers. So lots of input, and you know, the great thing is that policymakers are very receptive right now to really try and help. With that, we'll take our last poll. Veronica, if you can put that up, which is, you know, what do the participants think are the areas that require immediate attention by policymakers? And I believe in this one, yes, it's multiple choice, so you can pick more than one out of these 4, and then we'll again compare it to what we saw last month. And yeah. Veronica, when you have enough of a response, you can.
That's why I didn't stop it.
Yeah, I think people are dying to go grab a coffee, so we'll try and hurry up. And you can, yeah, you can.
Yeah, right. They keep on responding. That's why we have over 50% already.
Yeah, that should be enough to get a feel.
Okay.
So 47% remittance service is essential. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because that one still continues to be an issue. And I remember, I think Larry, either you or Alex had made a statement that something like 40% of Moneygram's agents were sort of closed at one point in time. And that's a massive number. Right. So 140, 150,000 locations, probably same for Western Union. EKYC, so essential service 47, it was 53 last time. EKYC 67 was 71. I'm sure this is very geared towards particularly Middle East where it's not accepted. Literacy 49 to 41 last time, and fiscal incentives 40% to 29%. So yeah, this is really helpful, and please, as we partake in these initiatives, we really need that feedback. Right, we're at the end. I can't finish this without Larry asking you about the alleged Western Union bid of Moneygram, and you can choose to answer it or not. I leave it to you.
All I can say there is we're not sure why that Forbes decided to print a rumor that they heard, and both Western Union and us have said it was a rumor. So yeah, that's we're both public companies. We have very strict SEC disclosure rules. If there was something to disclose, we would need to disclose it. So it's a rumor that Forbes decided to print. That's what I would say.
Well, didn't do any harm to the stock price, so we like these rumors. Well, great. Thank you so much. This has been really insightful. I thank all the participants. I really thank the panelists for your time and your contribution. We plan to do this once a month, so please give us feedback of areas, topics that you'd like us to cover. And with that, a big thank you, everybody, and stay safe. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everybody.